I call this meeting to order. Welcome, everyone, to meeting number 92 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I'll start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, November 2nd, 2023, the committee commenced its study of issues relating to the horticultural sector. I would like to now welcome our witnesses for this panel with us today.
Welcome. He's going to be participating virtually today from Fruit and Veg, and I should say where Ron's from. He's from the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. From Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, we have Stéphane Larrasse, who is the Chair of Business Risk Management. And from my home province of Nova Scotia, and right from the Annapolis Valley, from Horticulture Nova Scotia, William Spur, who is the president and a hell of a farmer. So great to have you here in Ottawa. And we're going to start with 5-minute opening remarks from each organization. And Mr. Lemaire, over to you for 5 minutes, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon or good morning, committee members. And I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak on the issues impacting Canada's horticultural sector. CPMA, as you know, represents 850 companies growing, packing, shipping, and selling fresh fruit and vegetables, responsible for 90% of the produce sales in Canada. In 2023, the Conference Board of Canada pegged our sector's contribution to national GDP at almost $15 billion and found that the fresh produce supply chain supported over 185,000 jobs in rural and urban communities across the country. The issues impacting the fresh produce supply chain are diverse and complex. First, fresh produce consumption is declining. This is a concern. The government's support is needed to keep produce accessible to Canadians and make it easier for Canadians to meet Canada's food guide recommendations to fill half your plate with fruit and vegetables. Year over year, consumption rates have decreased as food prices have increased. Canadian adults should be eating 7 or more servings of fruit and vegetables daily, but recent reports found that 34% of the Canadians are consuming just 1 or 2 servings per day. In fact, the latest Stats Canada numbers show that almost 80% of Canadians over the age of 12, are eating less than 5 servings a day. There are both health and economic consequences to these trends. A recent report by Professor Kruger at the University of British Columbia found that fruit and vegetable consumption has decreased. The economic burden attributed to low consumption in Canada has increased to close to $8 billion annually, a 60% increase since 2015. Supporting access to nutritious produce, including a national school food policy and school meal program, could contribute significantly to Canadians' health and well-being, while also decreasing the government's healthcare spending. Second, increasing overall access to fruit and vegetables across Canada requires government programs and policies to address the regulatory burden and significant challenges impacting our sector's ability to produce and distribute fresh fruit and vegetables, such as the availability and costs of labor, production costs, transportation, and border access. The National Supply Chain Office and the development of a national supply chain strategy are important opportunities for more effective cross-government collaboration to help ensure Canadians can continue to put our essential products on their table. Third, it is crucial to recognize the cost of adjusting our supply chain to meet the challenges posed by emerging sustainability and environmental policies. CPMA members have been showing leadership in addressing areas such as biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon sequestration, food loss and waste, renewable energy, soil health, water conservation, and much more. The fresh produce sector has also undertaken significant efforts to align with the government's zero plastic waste agenda. Since 2019, our sector has experienced a 17% decrease in plastic volumes due to industry programs to address the government targets. However, the produce industry remains concerned with recent ECCC proposals related to the fresh produce packaging elimination strategy and targets that are impossible to meet for our sector. We are keen to work with the government to support and build on industry's substantial efforts with regulatory and policy initiatives that align with global practices and policies to ensure sustainability and competitiveness of the agri-food industry are met, offer incentives to industry efforts, provide and secure access to safe food for Canadians, and not create unintentional food waste or increased carbon footprint to the Canadian food supply. I would be remiss if I did not mention financial protection for produce sellers and the Grocery Code of Conduct. CPMA is greatly appreciative of the support shown by all committee members for Bill C-280 and hope you will strongly encourage your Senate counterparts to prioritize the passage of this important legislation. Also, as an interim board member of the code, I can attest to the fact that everyone continues to work hard to introduce a voluntary code, which is uniquely Canadian. As noted earlier, the issues impacting our sector are very complex, and we need to take a full food systems approach. We have shared with the committee our list of recommendations to the federal budget 2024, which include areas not covered in my remarks. I would close with this. Government needs to make food a federal priority and promote effective policies to support the production and movement of perishable items like produce and ensure the long-term viability of the fresh produce supply chain in Canada. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemaire. We'll now turn to Mr. Larras for up to 5 minutes.
To present to this committee today, and it's icing on the cake that I get to do it with Ron. So good to see everyone. My name is Stéphane Larras, and I'm the chair for the Business Risk Management Working Group at the Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada. I will do my best today to provide you with the collective perspectives of our 14,000 member farms that grow fruit and vegetables across the country today. I know this committee is examining issues affecting the horticultural sector. The critical issue for our sector that I will focus on today is financial viability. A 2022 survey conducted by our association revealed that 44% of our growers are operating at a loss and 77% can't offset production cost increases. Our findings are consistent with AAFC's analysis since that survey of recent farm income trends at the sectoral level. There are several headwinds that I want to speak to that cause this financial challenge. First one being inflation on input costs. Consumers are experiencing 15 to 20% increases commonly in many of their grocery prices. What they often don't know is this includes the share of the retailer and the wholesalers as well, not just the farmer. And what consumers definitely can't be expected to know is that farming input costs like nitrogen fertilizer have increased by as much as 128%, diesel by 110%, and natural gas by 85% between 2020 and 2023. Now, labor costs are typically the largest operating expense for fruit and vegetable farms, which often rely significantly on manual labor due to the sensitivity of our crops, as you are well familiar. So when the federal government projects that the only major input cost that isn't stabilizing or declining in the foreseeable future is labor, this is particularly worrisome for our sector because it will impact our farms' bottom line 5 times more than others like livestock and grains. The other part, the other headwind is asymmetrical or really uneven regulatory burden and support compared to our competitors. I start with the question, how much do we expect ourselves to know about the environmental regulations for blueberries from Peru before we buy them, or for grapes from Chile? And how much can we expect to know about the labor regulations for raspberries or tomatoes from Mexico before we buy them? How much do we expect ourselves to know about the financial support levels for U.S. farming imports before we buy American lettuce or cauliflower? We obviously can't ask consumers to reflect on this when all they want to do is buy food for their families and contain their growing grocery bill. But amongst groups like this, amongst policymakers, we need to reflect on these questions because it matters. The answers explain so much about why many of our Canadian growers find themselves struggling to keep up with our international competition. For example, when it comes to financial support, the U.S. provides twice as much as Canada to sectors that are outside of the supply management system. When it comes to environmental regulations, research like the 2020 study by the Fraser Institute show that Canada ranks well ahead of import competitors like Chile, for example, on important issues like pesticide use. The only countries more stringent than Canada in this study are European countries, and they happen to have twice as much the support level compared to Canada. Again, I don't think we can expect people to know all the regulations or support levels that surround each fruit or vegetable they put into their grocery cart, but we do know that Canadians, and we know this for sure, Canadians care to know that whatever is grown in Canada is grown at the highest level of care and responsibility and due diligence, whether we're talking environmental standards or labor laws or otherwise, and that is entirely fair and appropriate. The question I hear from growers that I want to share with this committee is this: if we can't force other countries to raise their regulations to meet ours, but we allow their blueberries to be sold next to ours, and if we can't force other countries to lower their financial support to our levels, but we allow their subsidized lettuce to be sold next to ours, then can we really be that surprised that many of our domestic growers report they can't keep up and are facing a financial crisis as a result of the recent inflation input costs? I'll conclude with the question, what can be done? I know this committee is examining crop insurance and one-off programs. I will conclude on those two themes, starting with a quote from Alan Kerr, who is a researcher at the University of Guelph and the managing editor of the Canadian Journal of Agricultural Economics. He says, agri-insurance is mainly for field crops, whereas agri-stability is mainly for livestock operations. The horticulture sector, which faces significant product quality variability, does not fit either program. And I think that's the challenge that I welcome discussion on. AFC analysis shows that not only does our sector have significant gaps in the crops that have crop insurance available to them, but even for crops where coverage is available, the uptake is on average significantly lower than in the cash crop sector, which reflects the difficulty to develop effective insurance products for the 120 crops in our sector. The difficulty in establishing crop insurance product is a cautionary signal for anyone hoping that revenue insurance will be a silver bullet for our sector, since revenue insurance essentially relies that a given commodity has an underlying crop insurance product. Our growers have made it clear that agri-stability needs to be fixed to make it effective, in particular for those with insufficient or no crop insurance options. The program's trigger level needs to be returned to 85% of a farm's historical reference margin. And our growers believe that while agri-stability remains at the current 70% trigger level, there is a significant opportunity for the federal government to provide additional support to this sector in the short to medium term. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec have shown that sector-specific solutions are possible, and our growers are looking to the federal government to work with provinces and territories to develop or enhance regional solutions that address the financial challenges experienced in our uniquely diverse sector. With that, on behalf of Canada's fruit and vegetable growers, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to share our perspectives.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. Spur for Horticulture Nova Scotia for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Honourable members of the Standing Committee, I thank you for inviting me here today. I am here as an advocate for agriculture and as a concerned farmer invested in the overall health and well-being of our industry. Before I delve into the challenges facing Nova Scotia horticulture, allow me to provide some context about myself. As mentioned, I am William Spur, President of Horticulture Nova Scotia and a farmer. My family farm is a fifth-generation farm growing onions, carrots, potatoes, winter wheat, apples, pears, peaches, garlic, strawberries, and more. I mention this to emphasize the diversity of our farm and most horticulture farms in Nova Scotia. Reflecting on the past, not that long ago, I cannot help but recall a time when I was optimistic and enthusiastic about farming. Agriculture in our province seemed to be at the top of its game. The apple industry was thriving, the wine industry was making a name for itself on the international stage, and the horticulture sector was adapting and investing in new equipment and technology. It was a time of prosperity and promise, fueled by innovation and good yields. However, in the recent years, I have witnessed a troubling trend. Over the last few years, it feels as though we are heading downhill at a very fast pace. Last year especially was extremely challenging. The rain, the polar vortex, the winds, the fire wreaked havoc on our farms. This served as a stark reminder of how fragile our agriculture industry really is. Aging demographics, rising costs, and climate change with increasingly unpredictable weather threatens to undermine the progress we have made and jeopardizes the future of Nova Scotia agriculture. Access to healthy food is fundamental to maintaining a healthy population. As farmers, we play a critical role in ensuring that fresh, locally grown produce is readily available. We face challenges of food security and limited access to affordable, healthy foods. We need to get the cost of production down. It is imperative that we work together to address these issues and create a food system that prioritizes local, healthy, and accessible foods. We need to invest in agriculture. Farmers face numerous obstacles. Rising input costs and labor costs are major concerns going forward. By investing in agriculture innovation and technology, we can strengthen and compete and help farming families and rural communities. I cannot talk about agriculture without talking about the environment. The health of our environment is paramount to a long-term prosperity of Nova Scotia agriculture. Climate change poses a grave threat to our agricultural lands with more frequent extreme weather events. As stewards of the land, we must prioritize sustainable farming practices that mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, conserve soil, water resources, and preserve biodiversity. But we need help to do this. We need to advocate for policies and initiatives that prioritize the production, distribution, and consumption of locally grown foods that are environmentally sustainable. I also must draw attention to the pressing issue of business risk management programs, which are currently failing to adequately serve our horticulture sector. Despite the diverse nature of our farms, existing BRM programs struggle to accommodate this diversity, making it challenging for farmers to access the support they need. The reduction of agri-stability trigger and compensation levels has left our sector very vulnerable to climate change impacts, with only a small fraction of horticulture acreage covered by existing production insurance. As we anticipate more severe weather events in the future, the inadequacy of current BRM programs becomes even more apparent. In conclusion, the health of Nova Scotia agriculture requires help. I urge you to prioritize policies and investments that support agriculture sectors and promote healthy local food in Nova Scotia and Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spur. We'll now turn to questions from our colleagues. We're going to start with the Conservatives. I believe, Ms. Rood, you were up first for up to 6 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. Mr. Lemaire, you touched on plastics a little bit. What we've heard, the new plastic ban is going to cost grocery retailers at least $6 billion. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us how that figure may have been arrived at, and how would the loss of plastic affect packaging costs?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Rood. And that's a very conservative estimate relative to the cost to grocers. And the number was derived through work that we've done as an industry with Deloitte to understand what the cost of food will be based on the elimination of plastics. And this isn't single-use plastic. These are plastics that can be recycled and put into a circular economy. We're anticipating if we were to eliminate the technology from our sector, it would be upwards of 34% increase in food costs. And even beyond that, a dramatic impact on greenhouse gas emissions, food waste, and a concern with Canadians relative in this time, the affordability of food is noted from one of the other witnesses.
Thank you. And you did touch on the fact that it's going to cost an extra 34% is what we could see produce rise in cost for Canadian consumers when they're already faced with challenges of affordability for groceries. What are the alternatives to plastics right now for the industry, and how do they compare to plastics? Are they as effective? And you already mentioned it's going to increase the cost.
Yeah, currently there are some alternatives in the market, and the industry continues to innovate. However, all these alternatives come with the increased cost. If we are looking at using, for example, clamshell strawberries, currently moving into an alternative packaging format, the moisture level in strawberries does not allow for that product to be effectively shipped and transferred for the distances that we move product, whether from Ile d'Orléans or from Ontario or from BC. So we need to look at a fit-for-purpose package that meets the requirements. So a bag salad, a fresh cut product, a strawberry, and I could go on. It comes back to the need to convey product from field, where in many cases it is packed, through a system to a consumer, and ensure this living, breathing organic product can survive the journey and still have 5, 6, 7, up to 10-day shelf life in the home.
In general terms, how would removing primary plastic packaging affect hygiene? And you did touch on efficiency and cost of moving the perishables. Will there be a higher cost to move those items?
Dramatically, if we can move them at all. And this is part of the challenge. It would basically, with the current proposed model, eliminate all the bag salad industry. It would eliminate any of the value added components, so all of the fresh cut business. And if you look at food safety, consumers, especially coming out of the pandemic, have a heightened sensitivity to food handling. There are some food safety risks relative to conveyance with a plastic-free environment, and that was provided through research that was done by industry in the last 6 months.
Do you have a dollar figure on what that would cost to our economy in job loss, job costs, as well as spending if we have an inability to provide fresh fruit and veggie trays, for instance, as well as all those packaged goods we find in the grocery store, the pre-made?
So if we start combining all the, so I mentioned because of a lack of consumption, because the conveyance of packaging also enables consumption and drives consumption within the Canadian market, we're looking at that $8 billion figure with every serving reduced. We see the numbers increase significantly. So we're looking at conservatively $6 billion, add on $8 billion, and then you start looking at a shift in the market. So the Canadian producers, so the greenhouse industry that is investing in new technologies, we're looking at a massive shift of job loss out of our horticultural sector, basically looking at new opportunities and or producing and shipping in other jurisdictions. So we will see an influx of our Canadian food being shipped to the U.S. and other jurisdictions where they can package and ship effectively.
What role does plastic play in encouraging consumers to purchase fresh fruit and vegetables?
So there's a series of components. So when we look at the right packaging choice, it's a combination of packaging that the consumer can identify and see the product. It's a visual experience still to see and understand. Everyone turns their strawberries upside down when they purchase. Then you're looking at, are we complying with the messaging around what the product is? Because unfortunately, the consumer isn't educated relative to one tomato versus another tomato. And that messaging and marketing component does drive consumption relative to what am I getting in it? Am I getting a product with more antioxidants if it's a health message? Am I getting a product that has certain taste variations compared to other products?
One quick last question. How much food would be wasted without primary plastic packaging, and what would be the consequences for landfill sites and for our physical environment?
So the impact on food loss, we're looking at over 50% increase of food waste on certain products, which is dramatic. But what's really scary is an increase in greenhouse gas emissions of over 50% because of the waste components that start occurring from field right to the consumer.
Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Lemaire. Mr. Lemaire, has there been any other advancements from other countries relevant to moving towards a more environmentally friendly packaging?
So on a global level, I was just in Europe last week, having the opportunity to have one of our team on a panel with German, Dutch, Belgian, individual from the UK, and an Italian. And there's great concern within the EU where we're seeing a shift towards looking at how do you move to a plastic-free environment for produce. What's interesting within the European Commission is Parliament shot down the wording that was proposed, and it's gone back to the EU and the Commission. And the Commission has re-proposed new wording that looks at introducing a model with a series of caveats. So the opportunity to basically enable the state governments to not incorporate an elimination strategy if there is a disproportionate economic and administrative cost. I'm just looking at it from our EU partners here. I apologize for looking at a document, but looking at if we see an issue relative to increased water loss, tertiary loss, microbiological hazards, or physical shock, oxidation. So all of these exemptions that the states would be enabled. Now, this has gone back to Parliament, and we understand Parliament is potentially going to reject this as well, because there's a hypersensitivity within the EU relative to where industry is and where the ability is to actually meet these targets, and the dramatic impact to the consumer in these jurisdictions, because of the inability to transfer from a plastic environment. The bigger picture here is a circular economy. How do we keep the plastics in the system? How do we enable collection and recycling?
I was just, Mr. Lemaire, I don't want to interrupt you, but I only have so much time. I was interested in that because I did read something relevant to, I don't have all the insights, but I did read something relevant to it while I was also looking at cross-border tariffs, which I'm assuming your sector would be very concerned about if other countries that we're exporting to start doing cross-border tariffs on the imports that they're receiving. And if we're not on an equal playing field, the producers will end up paying for this. So it's something that I will obviously be watching very closely, and I'm sure you are. And I'm going to move on now to Mr. Spur, please, with Mr. Spur, you just mentioned in your preamble about the rising costs. Could you elaborate on what those actual rising costs are for your growers?
Yeah, like Stephen said before, like the nitrogen was the big one. Fertilizer is huge. It's gone up, I think he said 128%. Like, I didn't have the numbers. I just knew right off the get-go it was over 100%. So fertilizer for us, pesticides for us, labor for us, it keeps on rising. And if we need to make more affordable food, we need just to get the cost down.
Yeah. And I know our chair sponsored a bill C-359 to address provisional registration approval to ensure timely access to things like feed, seed, and products. And I certainly endorsed it as a cosign with him. And it is frustrating. It is frustrating as a parliamentarian to see sometimes how slow bureaucratic process works. It's frustrating to the point where when you see things being utilized in the United States or Europe, and we can't access them here for up to, could be 2 years. I'm just wondering, is there any examples of that you could provide us with that may be an impediment?
It's any time that we've had to deal with stuff like egg stability, and it's always a long time coming. It's like if we were going to get it's usually 2 years is what we save when it's coming through. I don't know any examples right off my top of my head, but it does need to come faster. It's 2 years away is way too long. It's like we're dealing with a lot right now, and not to have financial help in a timely manner is really not helpful.
And just, I know there's been discussions on input tax credit and concerns raised by farming communities and for necessarily temporary farm workers or workers, labor, and we all know labor is an issue in the farming community. How does the present input tax credit, how is it an obstacle to you at the present time, or what's the cost to you?
I'm not that familiar with it.
Okay. All right. Some of these guests are yours, Mr. Chair, so if you want to take my last minute and a half, please do feel free.
It's only a minute, but I will take it, given Mr. Spurs here. I better not usurp my own colleagues as the chair. Will, can you talk a little bit about food in school? I know in the Annapolis Valley in particular, you talk about the ups and downs and the weather impacts that farmers are facing. I know a lot of the conversation locally is that if we can start to incorporate in the institutional buying, so think schools, think hospitals. I know this is a federal committee, but how important would that be to provide some stability to your growers that they had contracts with provincial agencies and they could ensure that they knew there was a consistent supply that they could continue to provide in the days ahead?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important. You look at our breakfast program, and it's a huge uptake on it. I got 2 kids in elementary school, and I always have a lot of times I have fresh fruit to give them, and they'll eat that, and then they'll go to school and eat some more. And so it is. There's a lot of kids out there that wouldn't have fresh fruit available to them, and it's a lot to do with cost. It's I'm fortunate that I can grab a bag of apples and give them and not care if they only eat half the apple, but a lot of people can't do that. And so when they can go to school, they can get fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. It's definitely really beneficial. Other industries too, I know that when wild blueberries, and there's a couple other people that were had a lot of inventory, and they were trying to get it into the hospitals, and I think they eventually got it in, but it took a very long time. And so if we could streamline that and have contracts, I think it would be very beneficial for both parties.
Yeah, certainly where the federal government's been involved in helping support provinces, maybe that's something this committee can look at. Thank you, Mr. Spur. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
On to Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. I'll start with Mr. Larras. You talked about the asymmetrical regulatory burden, and we're talking about reciprocity of standards. You gave a few examples. That is an issue. How can we remedy it? Do you have any particular recommendations that you can make to the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Perron. I think just to set the expectation clear, I don't think we're looking at changing or lowering the standards. That's not the message I want to convey. I think there is no simple answer, but I'll offer that the European model is that they view their agricultural system as having a contract, a social contract with their government, and for every layer of additional expectations that is posed on their domestic sector, on their farming sector, there is that green portion of the funding, the green pillar of farm support funding that the European government makes available to its farmers. The total amount of farm support between their, income support that's responsive to production losses and income revenue losses, and that green support is more than twice what we have in Canada. So I'm not saying that we necessarily need to model that one, but I think it is an existing model where the expectations on the farmers are accompanied by corresponding compensation, and it reflects a spirit of cooperation between government and the farming sector.
Merci beaucoup. C'est une belle réponse.
Thank you. That's a wonderful response. I appreciated your introduction. You said the idea is not to diminish the quality. It's a question of fairness. You want the right amount of support. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Europe, if there is a product that arrives that doesn't conform to the standards, then the product will not be received, correct?
I don't want to pretend to be an expert. I would be worried about Ron telling me he just came from Europe and he would tell me that I'm wrong. I happen to have anecdotal information that they have high standards. For example, on genetic engineered content, they have very high standards. I imagine they've got pretty rigorous standards on other aspects of what goes into their domestic food consumption system. But I don't want to speculate. I do believe so. In general, the spirit is true.
En tout cas, je pense que ça devrait pas rentrer.
If it doesn't, if it's not working according to the standards, it shouldn't enter, is the message that I'm hearing. Mr. Spur, you talked about increasing prices and climate change that you are exposed to, and the impact is quite strong. Insurance programs don't cover those risks currently. Can you elaborate on that and perhaps give us a recommendation to fix that? How do we adjust to this issue? In the past few years, every year, we see that things aren't going well, and it's always a different reason. We never know what's going to happen the next year. This is the objective of our study, to see how the state can have an overview or mitigate risks differently so that we can rely on local agriculture, not external agriculture.
So for us, the agri-stability just doesn't work. And so I think the next time that something can change in agri-stability is 2028. And it's just too far away. We need a program in place until 2028, until we can get stuff figured out. We need something in place right now. And I think it's 13% of horticulture farmers in Nova Scotia are insured by the province. And that's a very low number. And part of the reason is the premiums are just too high. So we just need a program in place that works for Nova Scotia. And so we need help with the premiums is probably what I would say the most need is. We need the premiums, and it just needs to be for a year or two until we can figure out the right system for us. We had a terrible year last year. If we have another terrible year this year, then it's not going to be good. And so BRM is really important right now.
OK. Donc, merci pour votre...
Thank you for your answer. So when you say you need a program now, I do agree. The structure of the agricultural partnership is very robust, and rigid. It won't change until 2028. However, producers have been asking for months to change this. I don't really know the situation in Nova Scotia, but I'm sure that it's the same as what's happening in Quebec. And nothing has changed federally. Nothing has moved, even for emergency loans. They asked for the refund to be period to be delayed in order for them to be able to have some breathing room. What happened in Quebec is that the provincial government allowed for access to interest-free loans to producers, but the federal government wanted the refund. So people took the money that the provincial government gave them and refunded the federal government with that. So they ended up without any help. What is a clear message that you would like to convey as a recommendation to the committee?
I think it needs to be up to the province. You got to allocate the money, and then the province needs to work together and figure out what works best for them. I just know about Nova Scotia. And so for Nova Scotia, what I can recommend is that we need something done right now. We can't wait any longer. The new program's going to be coming out new uptake's going to be coming out in 2 months. And so it's not a lot of time, but we just need help with premiums. The premiums are too high. We got a lot on the stake. It's just when we have one bad year, it's not the end of the world. When we have 2 bad years, a lot can happen, and so we need to have some insurances in place. So all I can really say is that we really need help with the premiums. And it's just for a transition year or a couple transition year until we can really figure out what is best works for Nova Scotia.
Okay, we're going to keep it at that. Thank you. We'll go to Mr. McGregor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank all witnesses for helping be here to guide our committee through this study. Mr. Lash, I'd like to start with you. I noted in your opening comments you were referring to that 110% increase in the cost of diesel. And I assume from, I've been looking at the publicly available price fluctuations in the price of diesel, and I assume you've seen that massive increase probably from now since 2019, 2018. Is that about correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The figures I'm quoting are compiled by Ridgetown campus of the University of Guelph,
Yep.
And that's based on real data gathering of prices experienced by farmers.
And that 110% increase, what has that done for your members? I'm assuming they're just taking that on the nose from all the transport costs.
Absolutely. The extra costs are essentially absorbed by farmers. Farmers obviously always try to pass on costs where they can. If you absorb every additional cost, obviously that's essentially just every additional cost would become a red figure in your books. But let's say that 75% are able to be passed on. You always have the competition factor from external factors as well, from imports and so on. It's very rare that 100% of costs are passed on. Mm-hmm. So you will experience a net loss as a result of that diesel price increase. So yes, they eat that cost.
Our committee is in receipt of publicly available data that shows that during the same time you saw a 110% increase in your diesel costs, oil and gas companies saw their profits increase by over 1,000%. So it's obvious that that kind of corporate greed is really filtering through and really hurting our farmers. just talking about inputs, I think this committee is really hearing you quite clearly of the struggles that farmers are going through with the cost of inputs. We've talked about diesel. We can talk also about fertilizer. In a previous study, we had the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture here, Keith Curry, a very familiar face to this committee and a great all-around advocate for the industry. He made mention of the fact that it was very necessary for the federal government to step up to the plate and start talking about a critical input strategy. Now, we don't have any specifics on that, but do you have any opening thoughts on what you think such a strategy could include? And do you think that's a recommendation you'd like to see this committee pursue as a part of this report?
Absolutely. I don't want to venture too far into the details, but for our sector, inputs include not just things like fertilizer and diesel, but also crop protection products. I would say, a holistic approach that includes everything that's needed to successfully grow fruits and vegetables in this country, and that would include the items you've listed, and would also include things like crop protection products, because that's so critical to our industry, is to have those inputs as well.
Yeah.
But yes, I believe there would be value to that, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Lemaire, I'd like to turn to you. You and I have had conversations about plastics. I think it's very important to also in this conversation put in the perspective of coastal communities, because, I live on Vancouver Island, and of course we deal with the very real problem of microplastics. The bioaccumulation in the food chain. It's pretty sure knowledge that every time I go fishing off the coast of Vancouver Island, I'm probably ingesting salmon that has some component of microplastics because of that bioaccumulation. I understand very well, and I'm very sympathetic to the plight that you find yourself in with these new regulations, but I really want to delve a little bit further in your exchange with Mr. McDonald. You were just about to start on the circular economy. Can you offer this committee any suggestions on how the federal government can maybe partner a little bit more with industry to start realizing that circular economy? Because the problem I hear from constituents and even from people who are involved in the waste chain is that when it comes to sorting plastics, if there's too much confusion, most of it will just go into the garbage stream. So what can be done to ensure that those plastics are in fact being reused and not ending up in the waste stream?
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And this is the complexity of the issue. So we need a strategic approach federally that brings together the provinces, harmonizes our EPR systems, and educates Canadians. That's the simple answer. When we look at the proposed regulatory approach and the P2 notice, it is actually removing the ability for compostables and biodegradable plastic materials. We have members who have invested in new technologies that have a totally biodegradable material that does not leave any microplastics in the environment. It's quite costly, but the industry has invested. So this is where we look at, there's a combination. There's no silver bullet. We need to look at how do we build the infrastructure, federally enable and support provinces and municipalities. The Canadian Federation of Municipalities needs to be engaged effectively to ensure municipalities who are very fragmented are enabled and supported, and the right funding mechanisms are put in place to bring the system together. We also need to create an economic engine. So we need to enable the value of these materials in the system.
There, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. We'll now turn to Mr. Barlow for up to 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to, before I go to some of our other witnesses, I want to go back to Mr. Lemaire, and I think it's important that we really highlight this number. I want to make sure I have this right. You said that if the current government goes ahead with the P2 plastics ban, the increase in food costs would be 34%. Is that right?
That's correct.
And we would see an increase of 50% in food waste. And is that 34%? And that food waste, is that something that you came up with, or is that from specifically that Deloitte report?
That's it. That's from the Deloitte report, as well as there's a series of reports that are publicly available on our website. I'm happy to have our staff forward them all. I think they have been provided to committee, but I'm happy to have them sent to committee again.
Can you make sure that Deloitte report is tabled with this committee as part of that report?
I can.
Obviously, we're also debating Bill C-234 in the House of Commons, and there is a Senate amendment as part of that that bill that removes the heating and cooling of barns from the carbon from the exemption, as well as greenhouses. What impact does that amendment on 234 have on the fruit and vegetable industry when you talk about 44% of your members selling at a loss?
Yeah. This is a dramatic shift, and we need to look at a targeted and time-limited carbon tax exemption for the agriculture industry. So greenhouse specifically, right now the sector estimates carbon tax costs about $22 million annually. If we move forward, that's going to rise to 82 to 100 million by 2030. We talk about food costs. This is putting it through the roof. And in many ways, when you look at all of the carbon sequestration that happens also in the greenhouse and some of the new technologies that are being pushed through, you know what? There's an amazing push to actually work towards carbon neutrality, but we're not there yet, and we need time, which is the key around a limited carbon tax credit that will, or exemption that will enable us to be functional.
Thanks, Mr. Lemaire. And maybe to Mr. Spur and Mr. Larose. Mr. Spur, you said you need help now to get through what could be another tough season. We're feeling the same in Western Canada with not much of a snowpack and water always an issue. But Bill C-234, which would exempt the carbon tax from farms on natural gas and propane, specifically greenhouses, and for you in your produce, heating and drying of product in barns, would immediately remove the carbon tax for you. Would that be a benefit to you and your production and your colleagues in Nova Scotia by removing that carbon tax from your bills?
Yeah, anything that gets put on us that we have to add extra cost to, it's just going to add to our bottom line. And so, being exempt from it would be beneficial. But it's one thing there's a lot more that is accumulating, like the pesticides, the fertilizer, the labor. It just adds to it. And so the carbon tax is, it'd be nice if we didn't have to pay that, or not even get exempt. If we had to pay it, and then we could take that money and invest it into being sustainable. If we could,
right, and just to be clear, that carbon tax is not only on your natural gas and propane, but when you're buying fertilizer, it's on that fertilizer. When you're paying for your diesel and transportation, it's also on that diesel. So by removing that cost, that would provide you assistance and financial relief right now, which could happen. But to Mr. Larose, you had mentioned about 44% of your members selling at a loss. How important is that carbon tax exemption on greenhouses specifically for fruit and vegetable producers?
Thank you for that question. It would be tremendously important to have the exemption that was originally in place be reinstated before the modifications to the bill were made. So the full exemption on inputs like natural gas for heating purposes would be the equivalent of tens of millions of financial relief. It would be tremendously impactful. It is urgently needed. I think I just want to reiterate the point that from a consumer's perspective, ideally the greenhouse operations would take on that cost themselves. But can we really expect growers to volunteer just taking on that cost? That some of that cost is going to be passed on. And so if we're talking about tens of millions in financial equivalent of that carbon tax on greenhouse operations, tens of millions are going to make their way into the food price that Canadians are paying. So I think it's impactful not just to our members, but ultimately to consumers as well. So if the carbon tax could be removed from the operation costs for greenhouses, growers and consumers would benefit significantly.
We're at time, Mr. Barrow. Thank you, Mr. Larose. We'll turn to Mr. Lewis. I think you and Ms. Taylor-Roy are going to split your 5 minutes. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll be splitting my time with Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you to everyone for being here. I would start with Mr. Lemaire from the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. You mentioned off the top that fresh produce consumption is declining and that we should be having fruits and vegetables on half your plate. Then you also mentioned about a national food program, food school program, and how that can help if the federal government's working in partnership with provinces and territories. Can you expand, because you mentioned it a bit, on how it's going to improve That would improve children's health, but it would also lower families' grocery bills and also supporting our local farmers, like Mr. Spur mentioned.
I think the integrated approach is key here. The challenges are federal, provincial, jurisdictional issues that were noted by the chair. But we can surpass those challenges, and I think the federal government can take a lead here. There has been a lot of good work and already modeling proposed for a school program, school food program, and this is working with key NGOs across the country and effective delivery systems. OF and VGA and Stefan's team already run a program in Northern Ontario, very effective, very targeted. How do we support existing programs in the market and expand those so that they are sustainable and delivering to those Canadians that need support? It means some dollars. It means federal coordination and enablement of the province and the municipal framework, from the school breakfast programs in BC to the programs in Nova Scotia, Ontario, and even in the far north.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That is absolutely going to, I believe, help our farmers locally, help the children, and keep costs of groceries down. So with that, I'm about halfway through. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you very much, and thanks for sharing your time. Thank you for all the witnesses for being here. It's an incredibly important conversation because I think confronting the challenges of climate change and pollution while supporting our farmers is what's needed. And I was very encouraged with the conversation that Mr. McGregor had, talking about how can we provide solutions, because leaving things the way they are is not a solution. One of the things I'd like to say is that often when some of the members talk about the costs of these programs, they don't talk about the cost of doing nothing. And you were talking, Mr. Spur, about the increasing climate events that you're facing. Many farmers are, and we know with plastic productions that not only are these microplastics getting into our environment, they affect groundwater, they affect food chains, supply chains, and are having really a huge impact on human health. So we never look at the costs that are incurred from that. We only see the one side of it. And you said that, that the quality, the environmental standards are very important to you. So I spoke with two members from your organization yesterday, Dave and Aaron, and we were talking about the greenhouses in particular. And one of the things they were talking about was how the carbon is captured in the greenhouses to be used for growing the plants. And I thought that was really encouraging. So is that one thing we can look at in terms of continuing to have a price on pollution that helps us reduce greenhouse gases, at the same time rewarding farmers for what they are doing to help with environmental goals? And I think, Mr. Larras, I'd ask you that first.
Thank you for the question. I understand the goal of creating incentives to stop. As you mentioned, the cost of doing nothing is that bad behavior could continue if the incentives aren't there. I mean, as a parent, I'll say that I believe in incentives. So I think the main message I want to leave you with is that if it's a true partnership, the European model is that there is significantly higher support. If you just look on a dollar for dollar basis, I say twice is actually more than twice. For our kind of sector that's not supply managed, it's significantly higher. So it's a true partnership rather than you need to do better. We know we can do better, but where is that partnership question? I think that's where I welcome the dialogue. As for greenhouses and the recirculation of carbon, it's a great example of how innovation and technology can actually help solve the problem, rather than just exhausting that furnace exhaust out, bringing that back into the plants. We're getting much closer towards, let's say, carbon neutrality through that kind of technology. Technology can get us a long way. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I think it's one really good example. Yeah. Because I think the other thing is that often these estimates are based on people not reacting to the price signals. So it's kind of the status quo. Let's just look at what would happen if the price was put on and people don't. But like you say, I think there's a lot of innovative, creative solutions that, by cooperating, we can come up with, and perhaps compensating farmers for the contributions they're making to offset or to sequester carbon is one of those ways. So I appreciate that. I think I'm at time because I was going to ask Mr. Spur for his comments on it, but that's okay.
Well, we'll see if we have enough time at the end, but we have to go to Mr. Parent. 2 minutes 30 seconds, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le...
Thank you very much. Mr. Le Maire, I have some questions for you. On the reciprocity of the standards, I discussed with Mr. Larras, but maybe you also can give me an answer. What's your experience? Are there products coming in from abroad that are respecting the standards that we demand of our own producers?
Products should not be entering the country if they have not met Canadian standards. The mechanisms that place at the border protect the Canadian marketplace. If a product is crossing the border without meeting our quality, food safety, and labeling standards, then it's a greater discussion we need to have with Border Services and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
OK. Parce que ça crée un déséquilibre.
It seems like there's we were told that there were various produce coming in from Mexico and South America. There are carrots coming in from China. Is there everything? Are we really surveilling what's coming in through the border? Is there a way of doing this more efficiently? And do we need tariffs for whatever does not respect our standards and that can help our companies to improve their environmental performance? What are your thoughts?
I have a great concern on a tariff-based system, only because the country who establishes tariffs is also the country that has to deal with tariffs on their trading programs. So we've been fortunate enough in the fresh fruit and vegetable industry to be a non-tariff form of business, and we work effectively with our trading partners to ensure that we have open markets. That way we can ensure the Canadian grower has access to markets without the burden of additional tariffs, because we put similar models in place, and then a reciprocal model is then influencing us. We worked heavily. I want to quickly talk to the EU. You were correct relative to the standards in the EU and access to market. If you don't meet the standards, you don't access the market. But one thing we saw in the EU, and this is important, on their pest regulatory framework, they've stepped back from over and removing pest management tools from the regulatory toolbox because they've realized the growers need them and there's no other alternatives. It's something we need to watch closely for the same context in Canada. Let's not burden the grower without having tools in their toolbox to effectively grow the products Canadians need.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Le Maire, Monsieur Parent. Maintenant, finalement, Monsieur
Thank you, Mr. Le Maire and Mr. Perron. On to Mr. McGregor.
To continue with you, just on the packaging alternatives, in British Columbia, we have a very strong attachment to our forest industry, and I want to put a plug in for a local pulp mill in my riding, the Crofton Pulp Mill, because they were, for a number of years, really trying to upgrade their paper line to make specialty paper products that would replace single-use plastics. Now, they have run into some troubles because of fiber availability. I remember when I was at the convention, the CPMA convention in Montreal, I think it was in April of 2022, I do remember seeing an industry showcase on some of the fiber-based innovative packaging that was coming out. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the developments that are going on in that? I understand that they are not suitable in all cases, but do you see, like maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, some really critical advances in fiber-based packaging that could maybe help support struggling pulp mills out on the west coast of British Columbia?
So thank you, Mr. McGregor. The question is good, and there is a CPMA member company called EarthCycle, and their product line is EarthCycle, and they actually were with us in Europe promoting this Canadian product, and it is a fiber base, and they have a range of other products that do meet the market. They're and meet an environmental footprint. Now, your comment on, is it a one solution for all? No. And this is where we have to pick the right package for the right product for the right system and the complexity of what that means. So the pulp discussion, so fiber increase, fiber packaging had a 14% increase at the end of 2023. That was on top of a 13% increase in the spring. So a 27% increase in fiber packaging in Canada is a tremendous impact to the cost of product through the system. As Stefan has mentioned, doesn't always get conveyed to the consumer in full because the grower and the supply chain absorbs some of that. But we're at the end. I want to talk to a couple other components of a study. In Canada, as you know, I'm chair of the Global Coalition of Fresh Fruit and Vegetables. Labor costs up 18% in Canada. This was in 2023, 16% increase in plant-based material costs, 21% increase in crop protection costs, 24% increase in energy costs, 20% increase in machinery and equipment costs. These are generalized numbers across the agri-food industry, the fruit and vegetable industry. But those costs have to move somewhere. The grower cannot burden themselves with them anymore. We're at a tipping point.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Just one quick question, Mr. Lemaire. You know I'm supportive of C234. I've supported at the House level. You mentioned $22 million of carbon price-related costs. I believe 4/5 of on-farm is exempted. But that 1/5 that is not, that's $22 million. Can you quantify that in the size of the industry? And again, I'm sympathetic to this. I've supported, but just for this committee's benefit, $22 million in cost. How big is the greenhouse sector in the country in terms of
the greenhouse sector? Just under $1 billion off the top of my head, ballpark.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank Mr. Spur for coming from Nova Scotia, Mr. Larras on behalf of Fruit and Vegetable Growers of Canada, and of course, Mr. Lemaire, no stranger to this committee. Thank you on behalf of CPMA. Colleagues, just before we suspend, we talked about grocery code of conduct and sending letters to grocery CEOs. We've done that work. I suggested to the analysts that we would include a press release explaining that the committee is calling for that. I'm just looking for your approval in that regard. No issues with the press release to inform folks what we're doing? Okay. Meeting suspended. We'll be right back. Please don't go far. having good chats with our folks that are in town. Okay, colleagues, we're going to get started on the second hour. Great first hour of testimony. And we just encourage, if you have to have conversations, to have them outside as we get started for the second hour. So for our second hour, we have three different witnesses with us, avec l'Association des producteurs de maraîchers.
From the Association of Producteurs Maraîchers du Québec, Catherine Lefebvre, President, and Patrice Leger-Bourgoin. With the National Farmers Union, Jennifer Fenning, President.
Growers Associations, no strangers to our folks in the Annapolis Valley. Emily Lutz, Executive Director, and Jeffrey Walsh, who was a Director, and of course an apple grower. So great to have you guys here in Ottawa. We're going to do what we always do, colleagues, 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we'll turn it over to questions. We might have to go just beyond 1 o'clock, but I'll do my best to manage time. Donc, premièrement, Association des producteurs maraîchers de Québec. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
First of all, the producers from Quebec. Dear members, thank you for the time you are giving us. For the last few months and years, the food producers have been desperate in the society with all the challenges. Last summer, the excess of water affected about 60% of land in Quebec and a loss of $143 million. And then there's been a lot of weather catastrophes, and there's been $7.3 million of costs. So these few costs show all the pressures that we have in our industry. Each season, a producer must invest several $million for the larger farms, and for smaller ones, 10 or tens of thousands of dollars before they can have at least $1 in revenue to fund their activities. They have to put their lands under warranty, so the situation shouldn't last any longer. I'll give you one case, the case of Ireland. In 2023, there's a very strange tendency. Broccoli and was no longer on the market.
He noted that the number of producers that were Irish of such vegetables went from 370 in 1997 to 165 in 2004. Since then, there's been a diminishment of 65%, and it has only been decreasing. There is a risk sharing that can be more fair, and that is inevitable. The EU is a good example. For a few years, they've been looking at measures in order to improve the protection of agricultures and farmers in the supply chain. They have forbidden 16 commercial practices. In that context, we welcome the efforts of the minister, Mr. Champagne, in order to stabilize prices. However, the consequences must not be disadvantageous for produce growers. In Ireland, the increase of exportation and the increase or growth of some retailers had a significant impact. There was produce workers received certain prices for their produce growers got certain prices, and that had due to the retailers, and that closed down some of them. We need to protect the small businesses. We also need to take consumers don't see added value to buying fresh produce that respect high standards with regards to social responsibility. Second, the reciprocity of international standards is not applied as it should be rigorously by our governments, especially with regards to environment and social issues. The ESG, all of the major companies in the country say that they're making huge efforts, but in reality, if they put their money where their mouth is, the local products would be used a lot more. An example, in January 2024, Quebec producer has an entire cargo purchased, and the retailer fixes a certain price. However, a few days later, the producer is told to come back and to get 2/3 of their cargo. The retailer found a cheaper price in Mexico. This means a lower price paid for, but the price in the store was not changed, so there is no advantage to the consumer. Onto solutions. It is possible to face climate change without attacking it, and the governments, in collaboration with one another, have to elaborate a food security plan and one to adapt to climate change. We must support companies financially so that they can adapt to climate change. In this context, improving agri-stability programs in order to mitigate losses because of the weather patterns is essential. We have to maintain to $350,000 the interest margin. And then, Ms. Lefebvre, unfortunately, your time is up. I'm confident that our members will have an opportunity to ask you questions during the question period.
So up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a farmer and a mother of the next generation of farmers. Founded in 1981, our family farm has grown to approximately 700 acres of organic vegetables. The third generation on this land, my sons and nephews, have chosen to make their careers farming food in the family business. We grow carrots and a variety of other root crops, as well as leafy greens and cooking veg. We are also a distributor, providing market access for a network of other local farms. Thank you for inviting us to participate in your study of this critically important issue. Canada's Food Guide recommends, as you've heard from Mr. Lemaire earlier, half our plate be from produce, hort crops, every meal. We can't overstate how important it is for Canada to have a thriving horticulture sector to provide this food. I'm a farmer. I need to make a living. I need affordable seed, affordable land, suitable water for irrigation when necessary, a return that allows me to pay employees a fair wage, and provide safe working conditions, and as predictable a climate as possible to accomplish all of this. We know that long-lasting GHGs will keep warming the planet even if we stop emitting today. We must adapt, and we must drastically reduce our emissions. As members of the Agriculture Committee, your duty includes doing everything you can to reduce emissions from the oil and gas industry and to stop the destruction of the wild areas and biodiversity that remove atmospheric CO2. The existing suite of BRMs are designed for broadacre crops and so do not work well for horticulture, and even less in the context of climate disruption. The costs of applying can exceed any potential return if agri-stability is triggered. The high value per acre, diversity, and perishability of our crops makes damage assessment so complex that it is extremely difficult to create formulas to assess weather and storm losses. Thus, any compensation available is low and may not be adequate to keep affected farms in production, particularly if claims are processed so slowly that the next revenue-generating crop is unduly delayed. We must invest in the on-farm infrastructure needed to adapt to our changing climate. Some specific examples are water treatment infrastructure for sustainable irrigation, photovoltaics integrated into shade structures, greenhouse design and technology that integrates photovoltaics and heat storage. We also need public plant breeding of locally adapted horticultural crop varieties made available to growers royalty-free. Class 1 and 2 farmland located near urban centers must be protected for our food sovereignty. Canada needs policy solutions to ensure this land is protected and reserved for farmers growing food. To ensure farmers can succeed under changing climate conditions, the NFU proposes that the AAFC establish a Canadian Farm Resilience Agency to provide farmers in horticulture and other sectors all across the country with trustworthy advice delivered by independent extension personnel who are not tied to agribusiness corporations, with public agronomists to provide practical advice and researchers to develop new methods. Farmers can increase their farm's resilience to climate change and reliably produce the food Canadians need. Spending just $1 or $2 per acre of Canadian farmland could result in the necessary adaptation and resilience. Savings in crop losses and BRM payments would greatly exceed the cost of extension services, so these important services for farmers can be had at no net cost. By promoting the resilience needed for Canadian horticulture farmers, we can expand their market share and keep a much higher proportion of the Canadian food dollar within our economy. We're here to address the climate impacts threatening the economic viability of our farms. We also face a rapid rise in costs of production, accompanied by downward pressure on the price we can command. The farmer's share of the consumer food dollar is small, so grocery store price increases disproportionately benefit the large retailers. Increasing ownership concentration in wholesale and food processing further depresses our returns. Falling returns are creating a structural deficit. The difference is being taken out of the land, farm workers' labor, and the farmer's income. Failure to address these issues means ever fewer Canadian hort farms, less of our food being grown in Canada, vulnerability to environmental, political, and economic conditions in the countries where our imported food comes from. Addressing these overarching issues is supported by Canada's food policy vision, which is all people in Canada are able to access a sufficient amount of safe, nutritious, and culturally diverse food.
Ms. Fenning, I've given a few extra seconds. We're at time if you have any final quick thoughts, but very quick.
Thank you. One sentence.
Okay, thank you. We'll now...
A viable, resilient horticulture sector is a critical component of Canada's food system, and if we don't support it, we erode our sovereignty as a nation.
Thank you, Ms. Fenning, and I apologize to the witnesses. We're always constrained in time here on Parliament Hill. So, Mr. Walsh, over to you for 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, distinguished committee members and fellow presenters. My name is Jeffrey Walsh, and I am a third-generation apple farmer from Rockland, Nova Scotia. I'm here representing the Nova Scotia Fruit Growers Association as the recently elected vice president. Our association represents tree fruit growers of Nova Scotia, which is primarily apples, but also consists of pears, peaches, and other stone fruit. The NSFGA was created in 1863 and has a long history of promoting education advocacy among farmers. Over the last 30 years, Nova Scotia apple growers have invested in high-density orchards of valuable new varieties, making us a leader in Canada's production of apples. Today, I'm going to speak on 3 issues facing our industry. The first issue is pest management and crop protection products required for growing apples. As a farmer, I see the challenges that arise when certain products are either deregistered or limited to the extent that it is impractical to use them at all. The PMRA, or Pesticide Management Regulatory Agency, is responsible for rules and decides which products are allowed or not. The Pest Management Center, or PMC, is a different body that helps generate new data and guiding rules around pesticide use. While the PMRA has been undergoing work to become more transparent and accountable, the PMC does not seem to be receiving the same support. The PMC collects data through research and studies that provides information on important decisions that have enormous impact on our industry. As an example, many apple farmers in Canada are facing a serious disease in orchards called fire blight, which causes trees to die. There are limited products to fight this disease, and the ones we do have are essential to protecting our orchards. If we lose them, our entire industry is in jeopardy. We need to invest in solid data and evidence to prove the safety and efficacy of these products, but also seek out alternatives if there are reasons to, so we can continue to grow food. This leads me to my final point on this topic, which is that our association supports Private Bills Number 359. We should take advantage of work in other trusted jurisdictions to allow quicker access to safe and tested crop protection products for our Canadian farms. The second issue is labor. Most horticulture farmers take advantage of seasonal agriculture worker and temporary farm worker programs. These are essential to our businesses, and we could not farm successfully without them. Some of these programs require the provisions of on-farm housing, meaning farmers are either buying or building accommodations, which is a huge cost. Due to the current housing market, many are choosing to build new. However, as I recently discovered after investing in accommodations of my own, none of the HST on the new build was eligible for an input tax credit due to a policy of the Department of Finance. This came as a shock, as most other commercial necessities on farms are eligible for a rebate. Along with the Nova Scotia and Canadian Federations of Agriculture, we are requesting that this be changed and encourage you to support us in this work. It would help farms with cash flow and encourage more investment in worker housing. It's really important that farmers provide high-quality homes for employees to live in, as we want them to feel safe, valued, and comfortable in their housing and hopefully return to us year after year. As a final note on labour, I want to recognize the Government of Canada for implementing the Recognized Employer Pilot, which has made it easier for farmers to apply and has reduced red tape, while also ensuring that those who do not follow the rules are restricted to their access in these programs. It's imperative that we work together to make sure that the employees and the farmers are benefiting and that the rules are being followed. The final issue I want to briefly speak on today is cost. It's becoming more expensive to grow food, and despite high prices in grocery stores, farmers are seeing declining returns. Costs like labor, trellis, trees, orchard maintenance, equipment, fuel, and even the bins to put apples in, everything is going up. We are competing with exports from other countries and states like Washington that put downward pressure on our prices. Oftentimes, those countries see less pressure on their cost of production than we face in Canada, and many of them are well supported by their government in the work that they do. I encourage you all to keep fighting on behalf of farmers so we can continue to compete. I appreciate your work, all of you do on this committee, and to support growers and farmers in our sector, and I appreciate your time today, and thank you very much for the invite to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. We'll now turn right to questions. I'm going to turn to Mr. Liu for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. First, I would like to ask a question to Ms. Lefebvre, Mr. Bourgoin. C-280 right now is awaiting royal ascension, and we hope that it will get ascension at the Senate quickly. Do you have a message with regards to the relevancy of C-280? It's very important for us because it provides financial security with the number of clients that we have. It really does provide financial security for Quebec produce growers. Thank you for your answer. On to C-234. I'd like to hear your thoughts. This morning, I met producers from your organization who asked us to bring back 234 to its original form when it had first been tabled. What are your thoughts on that, and what pressure can we put so that we adopt it as quickly as possible? I imagine that this is impacting you as well. I'd say that in Quebec, we don't feel the impact as much because we have provincial laws that manage the carbon tax. So C-234 will be disadvantageous to us if it were accepted as is. You must understand, however, that impact will be felt at some point. Quebec will not be able to be competing like this ad nauseam. So can we say that there will be an impact? Yes, there will be an impact. The supply management or the risk management program, you were talking about disaster after disaster. There is which program do you think needs to be reviewed as quickly as possible? In Quebec, the harvest insurance should be modified immediately. But there is also a program that we should have that we don't have. It would be an agri-disaster program, according to that can help with climate change, because agri-recovery is not doing the trick right now on the short term. Indeed, because the natural disasters are more and more frequent and we do need a quicker response and program. I think that the federal government's leadership should prioritize a program like that. Would you agree? Indeed. Still on the topic of climate change, there are new problems and issues with regards to mold and bacteria that are developing for various fields. The PMRA was not very lucky in recent years. The budget is pretty tight. We're not very competitive with other countries. Can you share some thoughts on that? And how do you think we should be reacting to the federal government? First of all, the emergency and certification responses or special certification from the PMRA take a very long time. We experienced that for carrots, and it's happening for beets now. Some titles are retracted without having any responses, or some pesticides rather are removed, and we don't have any alternatives. And so the decisions are taking too much time. So you think that there's this bureaucratic burden because there's a lack of personnel, but indeed there should be more budget allotted to the PMRA, according to you. Yes, indeed. If you take the example of the beets, this is a product that was already certified in Canada for the sweet beets, and we were already asking for a certification for the regular beet. And if we were to ask how long this kind of certification would take, the answer would be 12 years. So everybody agrees that there is an impact because there are massive delays. I'd like to steer your attention to something else that will also have an impact. We were talking about plastics earlier. Of course, there will be a financial impact that is very strong. Can you justify them? Or are you feeling them yet? No, not quite yet, but I'll come back to something that previous witnesses talked about, the reciprocity of standards. It's very important. If we're ready to bring in products from abroad that have plastics that our producers don't use, then we can't demand it from our own producers. I would also add, Mr. Lehoux, what Mr. Lemaire said earlier. There is a serious issue of food waste. Plastics right now allow us to preserve produce for a longer amount of time. So if you're going to the grocery store, take two different heads of broccoli. Put one in plastic and then put one just in your fridge. You'll see which one goes bad first. You'll be fixing a problem, but creating another one. Indeed, because 50% of food waste is what we're looking at with that change. Thank you for reciprocity of standards and bringing that up. I didn't forget about that. It is something that's very important to me. Sadly, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, on to Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll share my last 2 minutes with you since you have some guests from Nova Scotia, and I wouldn't want to impede on that. But I will also ask some questions in French to Mr. Bourgoin and Ms. Lefebvre. We spoke in November, and I spoke to many produce growers. There are some new incidents occurring from field to field that we're seeing droughts in some places, and then 100 kilometers away we're seeing floods. I know that this is very stressful for the producers that you represent. We've also talked about the harvest insurance, but also insurance premiums. I know that you started a study. I think that the witnesses from Nova Scotia also mentioned this. There seems to be an issue in the fruit and vegetable sector. Premiums are too high in order for it to be profitable for the sector to be profitable for our producers. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. And what do you think would be an acceptable premium with regards to income? Which sector would you compare it to? The produce sector is complex. We have to cover all of the the fruits and vegetables that we grow, which is not what's happening right now. There are protections for small vegetables, for example, that don't exist elsewhere. The producer pays 40% of the harvest insurance. And so we expect that 40% to be received, but that is not the case in every province. Then with the issue with harvest insurance is that it fills in a specific gap in a year that is challenging, where a small amount of profits are lost. In 2023, some farms lost more than 50% or 85% of their territory. Harvest insurance doesn't cover that. Harvest insurance covers 30% of the lost profit that it covers. When there's a crisis, there's a whole bunch of supply management programs. And if that doesn't work, of course, the provinces can ask the federal government for various programs. For example, for Agri-Recovery, which is not a program, but it is an agreement with regulation that sees what the needs are. You talked about an agri-disaster program. What would be the difference with Agri-Recovery? The issue is to properly analyze the needs of producers who are going through this crisis in order to implement a program. With agri-disaster, that's what I'm calling it right now because I'm using your words, but how would you see it working differently than Agri-Recovery? Agri-Recovery right now, as the province told us, is that it works on production defects that are not covered through insurance. Harvest insurance only covers 30% of the final cost. The difference between the two, well, there needs to be a program that exists. I called it agri-catastrophe, but it could be anything else, or agri-disaster, rather. That's the gap that needs to be filled. We need a program that will meet the needs of producers before a year and a half, because those delays for agri-recovery, it's too long. There's a disaster, and then 18 months later, the producer gets a check. That delay is too long. So it's a question of insurance in general. Even in the private sector, it takes time. I was explaining to somebody there were a couple of trees that fell on a piece of land, and it took months to get a check. But indeed, we should be finding ways to improve the measures that all producers can have access to, because they're all going through this crisis. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my time with the chair.
My Annapolis Valley Tartan Tie today because we have some folks from Nova Scotia just outside my boundaries, but of course good advocates in the province. Jeff, I want to pick up on what you talked about around the HST input tax credit. As I understand it, because we have had this conversation, I want this committee to understand what you're asking for. Right now, when you go to build new housing for seasonal workers, let's just say that cost was $1 million. In Nova Scotia, that HST would be 15%. As I understand it, you are able to take the entirety of that expense and claim that against your taxable income over the lifetime of the house. What you're proposing and what you said to this committee today, it would be nice to be able to have that HST provided up front when the purchase of the home is actually made or the building of the home is made for cash flow purposes. Is that correct? Just so this committee can understand.
Yep, that's correct. CRA treats it as residential, even though we can't rent it out to the guys. So it's just treated differently than it would be if it was a cold storage building or a barn or any other infrastructure for the firm. It's just treated differently than that. And when I was building it, or when a lot of growers in our area were building it, we all assumed that the HST had a rebate on it, like any other commercial expense.
You mentioned access to farm input tools, I'll say, pesticides, pest management products. I certainly concur. I know many around this table would. But just quickly on research, because part of what has made Nova Scotia apple industry so competitive is the Honeycrisp apple, which I know has been a high-value product for our province and indeed across the country. Research is important. The government's putting a lot of money into research, including for GHG emission reduction. But how important is it that it's not just environmental, but it's trade competitiveness as well? Just quickly for our time.
Pest protection, I mean, the PMC needs to go out and find the data to put it in to give it to PMRA. If we lose some of these chemistries, we are going to be in a huge mess. Like, we won't have to worry about putting apples in bags because there will be no apples to put in the bags. It's very important that PMC and PMRA be funded accordingly.
Perfect. OK, I'm going to go maintenant pour Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, you have 6 minutes. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Lefebvre, I'm going to continue on what Mr. Drouin was talking about. You were talking about something quite interesting. You were talking about a reform, and that is the call that you talked about at the beginning of the summer, and the federal had no response. You talked about agri-disaster, and you explained properly that agri-recovery doesn't cover the 70% that's left over. How would you be able to, how do you think we can implement this program quickly? Do you have a recommendation, perhaps in writing, that you can send to the committee? I'll ask Catherine from our association as part of the agronomy sector. There are many documents that we can provide. We've had many meetings with them, and we do have hard data that we can provide you with. It is urgent, though, and that's what needs to be understood. Is there anybody in your amongst your members who have talked about leaving production entirely this year? Well, more than just talking about it, in the fall, some people did leave. There was a show that on a few people who have left. 2 or 3 farms have closed shop, and a few have left the region. There's also a talk about the acreage that is an issue. And so what do farmers do with their acres? Do they just what do they do with it? Well, sometimes they rent it out to other producers, or they harvest themselves, depending on the equipment that they have. So if I understand correctly, if we continue to tell producers to plant, but in June, sort it out yourself if you have an issue, these are people who will leave the industry and perhaps resort to less complex types of harvesting, if I understand correctly. Indeed. Now let's talk about food security. We're talking about quality. There's a lot of standards with regards to environment, pesticides, and so on. What can you tell me about what we import with regards to the reciprocity of standards? One thing is clear. In the last meetings we've had here, we had shown some examples. Here's what's upsetting. There are private standards that the government can't impede about. There are these ESG, environmental, social, governmental standards, and many retailers in Canada have these standards, ESG standards. So I invite you to look at the 50 pages of the reports of each retailer that talk about this. After you've read these documents, you'll notice the following. How come they are applying everything that how could they be applying everything that they've written, but then you see carrots from China in October and November, but our producers in Ontario and Quebec have packed fridges. They're full. What do you call that? Are you concerned? Are you concerned about pesticides and herbicides that are used in those products? You have to look at what's happening in the United States. They forbid carrots from China on their territory unless there is a shortage in the United States. We talked about it earlier today. There are diseases that can come about on the American territory, and we don't want them. How come at the border there are diseases that are not being considered as threats to food security in Canada? Earlier, there was a discussion with Mr. Le Maire. We said that there were some standards. We talked about perhaps adding tariffs to products that don't meet our standards. What do you think? First, we should do more inspecting because there isn't enough inspection at the border. And then with regards to environmental standards, we're talking a lot about societal norms in Canada that don't have any scientific basis. It really is a disadvantage when you talk about the vis-a-vis importing companies. So you feel that there should be a bit more help, like in Europe, as you mentioned earlier. I'd like to talk about the certification of products. There was something recently where there was a product that changed just a little bit, and it was approved in the United States, but it took so long to approve it in Canada that we couldn't import it, and then we ended up importing carrots that had the same product in it. Can you talk to me about certification and reciprocation with the United States? Well, the issue right now is that it's not just with the United States. If we talk about beets and the issue that we're having with the PMRA this year, the beets that are on the market now are Mexican beets. Mexico has no issue when it comes to Betamix, which is an old product, or Nortron, the new one, the new pesticide. Mexico is not at the same level as us. And so competition is always increasing, and we have less and less means to be able to produce at a reasonable cost. So we need resources to get that reciprocation quickly. Indeed. Yes, and so on to Mr. McGregor.
And I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here and helping guide our committee through this study. Ms. Fenning, I'd like to start with you and the National Farmers Union. It is a fact that climate change-driven extreme weather events are going to come with more frequency and more severity in our future. And we know that farmers are on the front lines of that. I've spent 6 years on this committee, and I have often heard farmers say they are on the front lines of climate change. And, there's some particularly worrisome trends that are coming our way. I know there's a lot of concern on the prairies for this upcoming summer because of low snowpacks and precipitation levels. And I've always had my work on this committee guided by the theme of establishing resiliency. I know farmers are very wary of an Ottawa knows best approach, but there are farmers who are showing us the way. And I think it's the job of this committee and indeed of all parliamentarians to find those farmers who are leading the way and put them up on a pedestal and to help them spread the knowledge. I was very taken by your mention of a Canadian Farm Resilience Agency. Would you mind expanding a little bit on that and how you think this committee should tailor a recommendation to that effect?
Thank you very much for the question. And I want to say thank you again for taking the time to study this issue. A Canadian Farm Resilience Agency would be a comprehensive way of supporting farmers' resilience. And I appreciate that you recognize farmers are very independent. We don't want handouts. We don't want, to just be dependent on Ottawa to give us what we need. But we need programs and systems and regulations that support our ability to do what we do best, which is grow food. And when we're talking about the knowledge and research that's required to adapt to the changing climate and increased impacts from wilder and wilder weather, it needs to come from a space that is not attached to a sales pitch. Right now, most of the information that we have to access for new research or new products or new ways of doing things comes from an agribusiness source where there's a sales pitch attached to the information. The CFRA, one of the key pieces would be offering information and making it accessible to farmers across the country that is developed on farms, developed by farmers, developed by publicly funded researchers, and an agronomy base that would be in the best interest of the country and serve Canadians, not a business that is making profit off of it.
Thank you. And I know your organization is a member of a broader umbrella group, Farmers for Climate Solutions. And I recently had a meeting with them, and one of the big topics was they would like to see the implementation of a sustainable agriculture strategy. Do you know a little bit about that, and do you know how this Canadian Farm Resilience Agency might fit into that wider strategy?
I think the CFRA would actually enable us to implement all of the things that we see are necessary under the Sustainable Ag Strategy. And Darren Qualman is the NFU's representative on the Sustainable Ag Strategy tables, and he's representing us very well. And I would encourage that as you're looking at that Sustainable Ag Strategy, don't water it down. Keep it strong. We have to keep the vision very effective and bold and visionary. The CFRA would, and we have, I don't have enough time here to explain all of it, but we will provide a written submission with further details and an expanded explanation of it. Essentially, it's a way to support farmers to do what we need to do to adapt to climate change. I've lost sound. I'm not
Sorry,
hearing.
the microphone wasn't on. I'll stop the time. I'll put 30 seconds. Alistair, you get 90 seconds left. Okay.
Let me rephrase the question. So I just want to switch gears. It's a known fact that there are extreme labor pressures in the agriculture industry. And new data just came out today from the Canadian Agricultural Human Resources Council. They estimate by the year 2030 there will be 100,000 vacancies in the agricultural industry. And given that that is such a key component to its future success, to its current success, does the NFU have any ideas it'd like to share with the committee or see in a recommendation on how we can best approach that labor deficiency, that gap, to ensure that our farmers are as successful as possible?
Thank you very much. You've touched on a really important point, and I saw the notice that report has hit my inbox, but I haven't had a chance to look at it. On my farm, I'll just talk, for a minute about a specific example. In the peak of our season, we employ roughly 150 people. 45 of those individuals come from overseas. And we have, as a country, been relying on offshore labor, human beings who come to our country to work on our farms and do the essential work of producing food. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw what happens when we don't have those skilled hands in our fields. Ultimately, if we want to address that labor shortage, we have to ensure that we set farming up, and horticulture specifically, because horticulture has a very great demand for physical labor and human labor that cannot be replaced by machines, as we have the technology has not been adapted to that, and I struggle to see how that would happen in any short period. So we require a lot of people. If we want to address that, we have to ensure that we have a system that enables the people working in the field to produce the food we eat, to have a dignified work experience, no matter where they come from. Relying increasingly on workers who come here and are subjected to very strict controls that reduce their agency and in many ways disenfranchise them and make them vulnerable is not a productive or positive way forward.
Okay.
We as the NFU have many papers on that.
Thank you, Ms. Fenning. Mr. McGregor, I gave almost an extra minute and a half. I know you'll be judicious in your second round to get us time back. Go ahead, Mr. Rapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll begin with our friends from Nova Scotia. Appreciated your testimony on the temporary foreign worker and housing situation. That's a very familiar subject to my own riding that has a large horticultural presence. Also with your testimony regarding PMRA and PMC. Can you just talk quickly about the cooperation with our Canadian regulatory folks in the industry with the IR4 program and the number of projects that are being supported given inflationary costs and the lack of support to PMC? I'm assuming that the number of projects that qualify is being reduced. Yeah.
Yeah, I can take that one. Thank you. I'm Emily Lutz, the Executive Director, here to support Jeff in his questions. So speaking directly to that, the FVGC is looking for an $8 million increase on PMC, and what that does is directly translate into the ability to do more projects and collect more data. I think what's important to recognize, too, is the best data helps us address increasingly complex issues, and some of that is also driven by climate change. It's not just the products we're using right now, but it's the projects and the challenges we're facing moving forward. So climate change has brought insects to our industry from elsewhere because of our warming climate that we have never seen before. So looking forward ahead into that data that is going to be essential for the PMC to be able to collect that data for us to be able to use to make good farming choices.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch to our friends from Quebec. We heard in testimony earlier that consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables is declining, cost being one of the main drivers. One might think that if Canada adopted a code of conduct, that would bring transparency but would increase the cost to consumers. Mr. Bourgoin, you touched on Ireland. The UK has a code of conduct, and the consumer experience has been just the opposite. So can you expect, or could we expect in Canada, if we took a code of conduct, that the consumer would actually see lower prices?
Thanks for your question. Les consommateurs verraient certes.
Consumers will certainly see an advantage to having a healthy relationship between suppliers and retailers. We worked 2.5 years upon the request of federal, territorial, and provincial ministers in order to have a dialogue, in order to come up with a grocery code of conduct and establish best practices. There was a lot of maturity there. We spoke honestly and collaborated. We were able to table to the satisfaction of ministers a grocery store code of conduct, which in our opinion will serve the interests of everyone in the country. However, there is right now one player who came here to say that he disagreed. So there was a process, a consultation process that lasted 2.5 years, and at the last minute, he's in disagreement. He doesn't want to participate. That attitude is completely unacceptable.
Who needs to participate in the code for the consumers to benefit? Everyone?
Les grands détaillants.
Major retailers who influence the markets. So the 80% of sales that are made by a few retailers, 5 of them in Canada, have to be a part of this and participate. The associations of smaller retailers participated very actively to come up with this code. And its goal, I remind you, is to make the relationship healthier. After 2.5 years of exploring, we should be able to come up with a positive answer to this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Bourgoin, in your testimony between you and Ms. Lefebvre, you mentioned that there's some instances where farmers are being undercut by whether it's the big grocers, and my colleague just touched on the code of conduct. And I'm wondering if you can give us an example of some of the practices that you've seen in Quebec, because we've heard some of the things from farmers in Ontario, but what have you seen the grocers do to farmers in Quebec when it comes to advertised specials and getting their local product into grocery stores in Quebec, and how would that code benefit those farmers?
Thanks for your question. I'll give you one example. Cet exemple-là arrive.
Here's the example. It happened last January. A Quebec producer received a call from a retailer to sell a product, just as my boss said earlier. The product was there was an agreement over this product with that retailer. That same day, the retailer received a better price from a Mexican producer, and they decided to cancel the order from the Quebec producer. When major retailers come here, they say that their objective is to reduce the price for consumers. However, in that specific case, we continue to observe over the coming days the removal of the Quebec product to the benefit of the Mexican product. And funny enough, we didn't see that the price in the stores had diminished. They kept the same price even though the chain had a better price from this foreign company.
Thank you for that information. I'd like to move a motion that the committee invite the Minister of Agriculture to appear no fewer than 2 hours regarding the Supplementary Estimate C 2023-2024, and that this meeting take place as soon as possible, but no later than March 1st, 2024. Thank you.
Well, that could be tough given that's 2 weeks away, but of course we always have the minister in to be able to have different opportunities to hear from, so we'll see where that goes as a committee. Okay, we'll turn it over to Mr. Lewis for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I'm going to direct my questions, and I'll be splitting my time with Ms. Taylor-Roy, to the National Farmers Union, Jen Fenning, because it's an honor to speak in this committee to a farmer who lives 15 minutes down the road from me. In Kitchener-Conestoga, and we've had many conversations, well, on your back porch and on the kitchen table. You mentioned in your statement off the top, Class 1 and 2 farmland must be protected and reserved for farmers to grow food. Can you expand on the importance of keeping this farmland for us to have that local food? I understand in Ontario we're losing 319 acres of farmland every day. So what can we do to keep those small, medium-sized family farms like yours in our communities? What measures can we take to protect farmland, and how can all levels of government work together?
Thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Tim, and look forward to having some more chats on the deck or at the kitchen table. You know, I probably don't need to remind all of you just how precious Class 1 and 2 farmland is in our country. Less than 0.5% of our total land mass, it fits into that category. More than 50% of it is in Southern Ontario. And it's mostly very close to urban centers. Those urban centers are the source of pressure on that very farmland that feeds us because of expansion of the urban centers and sprawl. All levels of government need to work together to ensure that the protections that exist are not eroded, in fact, that they are strengthened. Farmland needs to be seen as a non-renewable resource because it is. And if we allow the existing dynamic to continue, we will lose the capacity to feed ourselves eventually and in the not too distant future. Farming should be the number one highest priority for Class 1 and 2 farmland use for every piece of it across this country. And by enshrining protections that ensure that it is kept, we will enable ourselves to continue to feed ourselves into the next generation. It's been very difficult to prevent loss of farmland as individual farmers because we're under pressure to sell. For the next generation to take over is very difficult. We don't have a way to save for retirement beyond the increased value of our farmland that we have to then sell. And those falling returns for what we grow are creating the structural deficit I mentioned. Input companies and landlords are taking too much. Buyers are paying too little. The difference being taken out of our land, out of the labor, and out of our income. Allowing it to continue is unsustainable. We need to look to the future.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to share my time with Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you.
Got about just under 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lewis. And actually, you asked one of the questions I was going to. I'd like to continue directing my questions to you, Ms. Fenning. I appreciate what you're doing as an organic farmer, and in my constituency, there are several of them. Southbrook Wines, Bill Redemeyer Frank's Organics, Joyfully Organic Farm, and a number of these I've spoken to, and they're very concerned about the organic standards that we have in place and the cost of certification. I'm wondering if you have any comment on that and what our government can do to support organic farms in particular.
Thank you very much for that question. And the farms you mentioned, I'm very familiar with them as well. Enjoy Southbrook wine a lot. The organic standard is the key to maintaining our ability to protect organic farmers from imports that don't meet the same standard. As we are reviewing it currently, we have received funding from the government. We're very grateful for that as a sector, but we need supports in place to ensure that that support to review and maintain the standard is ongoing. Other jurisdictions around the world are supporting their organic standard. Our biggest trading partner, the U.S., they are investing far in excess of what we have invested per capita into organic. And that's our biggest competition as farmers in Ontario, as in Canada. We are competing south of the border.
We're going to have to leave it at that. Thank you to you both. And I would like to recognize the presence of Mr. Assassi, the Member of Parliament for Willowdale, who has presented a motion on food waste in terms of creating a framework. So great to have you as an urban MP here taking interest in rural issues and sustainability. Thank you, Mr. Assassi. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 seconds, s'il vous plaît.
Oui.
Now on to Mr. Perrault for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Ms. Fenning, with regards to that association, you said it should be more decentralized and it should be just a center that collects data, which that should be coming from sources that are publicly funded, not from companies that will make profits with the products that they are suggesting. I'm thinking of the recent regulation on genomics that I'm sure that you saw. Do you agree with the following? If we do something like that, it should really be decentralized in order to respect the realities of each province and territory with a very different harvestable lands and climates, and we should go and seek more investment?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. My French is not strong enough to answer in French, but thank you very much.
So, yes, what you're saying, and I apologize that my sound cut out a little bit during the question. Yes, we're asking for it to be decentralized, but it needs to be nationalized. So we need centers across the country. As we all know, this isn't something I need to explain to anybody, I'm sure. We all have different conditions on our farms across the country. We're facing different environmental stressors. And so we will need those centers to be adapted to and addressing the specific conditions in each area. For example, right now, the snowpack...
Madame Fenning, je m'excuse de vous couper, mais le temps est vraiment limité.
Sorry to cut you off, but our time is short. I understand your message. I would like to know your thoughts, Ms. Lefebvre and Mr. Bourgoin, and if there's anything else that you would like to insist on during your testimony. In 30 seconds, please. Well, here's something that's important to me. Ms. Rood brought it up earlier, the motion that she tabled for the federal budget needs to take into consideration funding into agriculture. That needs to be representative of what we provide and give back with regards to the GDP and anything else financially. I think that we deserve our part, whether it's through insurance or supporting our agriculture, but I think that we need more and we deserve more.
Nice succinct response, please. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm going to ask my questions to our Nova Scotia guests, so I hope that adds a few points there. Yes, to the Nova Scotia fruit growers, you know, I'm a coastal Canadian on the Pacific side, and, you know, my province was battered by an atmospheric river in the fall of 2021. Absolutely brutal devastation and damage. I think it cost our province about $9 billion, and a lot of that came from farmland. I know Nova Scotia is no stranger to your fair share of natural disasters from weather. I'm just wondering, like, can you explain a little bit about the hard lessons learned from those events and where you think the federal government can be stepping in to help farms adapt their farming practices to try and establish a little bit more resiliency in the face of what are sure to be future storms coming your way? What can be done to help you adapt and become more resilient?
So one of the things that went on in the last 10 years probably is Dalhousie University did a study on infrastructure for our actual trellis equipment. So we have a template now that we can plug everything into to build stronger, more sustainable systems for holding the trees up. There's nothing worse when a hurricane comes through in September and the trees are loaded with fruit.
Yeah.
Not only do we lose the crop for the year, we lose the whole tree and we're out of production for years to come. So it'd be nice for more business risk management systems put in place for trying to weather that, hail netting, things like that. Like there's different climate change things that we can mitigate, but the costs are massive to try to get them implemented.
And just to add on to that, if the costs are going up, the cost of production are going up, our returns are declining, and so farmers have less money in their pockets to address these issues that we need to fight climate change. One of the things I also wanted to point out is that the burden on associations and on growers and on industry to contribute to research keeps going up. So we have these problems. We are receiving less money for our products. Our cost of production are going up, and then we are seeing that our share of research projects keeps going up as well. So it's really hard to find those dollars to contribute to those research projects that can help us find ways for us to reduce our own environmental impacts and mitigate climate change on our own farms, as well as look to the future and try to see what's coming and plan for how we can grow in changing conditions. So I think there's a lot that the federal government can do in terms of lessening the burden on industry and on associations regarding our contributions to research, because we simply just don't have available cash to be putting into these projects. And when we see the contribution formulas change from 50-50 to 70-30, might be well intended, but it's really difficult for us to come up with that cash when our farmers are struggling to make ends meet and to even farm.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Just quickly, Ms. Lutz or Mr. Walsh, on cold storage. You mentioned in your opening remarks Washington and some of the apples that are kind of being flooded to the market. Can you speak to this committee about the importance of not only cold storage research, but how that is a market mechanism to try to help protect value for your products?
You want to get it? Yep. Okay, Jeff's got it.
We have some of the best cold storage. We do a lot of research at our Kentville AFC building, so we have some of the best cold storage data around. We're able to sort of hold our fruit back in cold storage longer while Washington and other areas flood the market out, and we can hold our fruit till the spring or summer the following year, and we can hold it for a whole calendar year, and then that sort of helps protect us a little bit on cost, because while they're flooding the market with low quality, low valued fruit, we just hang on to ours, sell domestically, sell a little bit to where we need to, and then can hang on to it until June, July, August, sell it all then at a better price.
Okay. Colleagues, thank you so much. We ran a little bit over time, but I thought the testimony was great today. So let me thank our witnesses avec l'Association de producteurs maraîchers de Québec, Madame.
Thank you for your presence, Ms. Lefebvre and Mr. Bourgoin from the Association des producteurs maraîchers du Québec.
Nova Scotia, Ms. Lutz and Mr. Walsh, thank you for your testimony today. Colleagues, we're going to be on break week next, but we'll be back on the 27th with the first hour being horticulture, the second hour being Mr. Champagne with the Minister Champagne with the continuation of efforts to stabilize food prices. And just a quick note on Grocery Code of Conduct, there was great exchanges today to our friends here around the table. This committee believes in the Grocery Code of Conduct, and we'll be writing to the CEOs expressing our complete desire and call for them to adopt that code. So we'll see you after the break week, colleagues. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
you.